Once you've determined which passage you're going to preach from, your next step is to try to determine what you're going to say about the passage. And the first step in that process is coming to decide what is the main idea of the text that I'm in. So what I want to do in this session is help you chart a pathway to getting at the main idea of your text. I happen to believe that every text is written for one primary purpose. There may be a lot of different ideas in each text of Scripture, but each one really has one primary purpose, one primary meaning that you want to communicate to your listeners. And so where you want to start is by asking that question, what is the main idea of that particular text? We're going to call that main idea of the text the exegetical proposition. The exegetical proposition is just kind of a fancy way of saying, when you study the text, how can I, in a concise and simple way, express the clear and main idea of this passage? So where you want to begin, of course, is by studying your individual text. So if you are not familiar with inductive Bible study, that's the first place to start. Inductive Bible study just simply means, how am I going to look at the text to determine its meaning? And I begin with observing, what does the text say? Like literally, what are the facts of this text? Secondly, interpretation. What does it mean? So you may have certain questions about the text that you need to answer. And then application. How should a person apply this ancient text in the 21st century? One great resource for learning how to study the Bible, if that's something you're not familiar with, it's called Living by the Book by Howard G. Hendricks and William Hendricks. It's a great just introduction to inductive Bible study. Observe, interpret, apply. Now, for the sake of this training, I'm going to assume that you have some background in studying the Bible, and so we're not going to go into that in detail. But once you have a reasonably good handle on the text meaning from studying it carefully, your next goal is, can I state in one concise sentence what the text means? And probably the best way to think about this, at this point, you're not trying to say, what does it mean to me, or what does it mean to a present day audience? But instead, you're saying, what did this text mean to the original hearers? So if you're looking at the book of Romans, what did this text mean to the church of Rome in the first century that Paul was writing to? How would they have understood this text? So you'll look at grammar and history and all of those things to get at that, to get to your exegetical proposition. And then what you want to do is think about two facets of your main idea. The first is called the subject, all right? The subject is, what is this text about? And then the complement is, what is this text saying about what it's about, all right? I know that's confusing, so let me illustrate just a little bit. If I say to you, for vacation this summer, the Morton family went to Disneyland. All right, now that's not true, but if I were to say that, for vacation this summer, the Morton family went to Disneyland. The subject of that sentence is, where did the Morton family go on vacation this summer? All right, it's a where question. So what am I talking about when I share that with you? I'm telling you where I went to vacation. The complement is, we went to Disneyland. All right, the complement answers the question that is posed by the statement. So the subject, where did we go for vacation? Complement, we went to Disneyland. All right, let me give you another illustration. My daughter is going to Texas A&M because of the great academics, the amazing football program, and the friendly student atmosphere. So if you think about that, what is the subject of that sentence? The subject of that sentence is, why is my daughter going to Texas A&M? All right, it's a why question. The answer? Well, there are three complements here. First of all, because of the amazing academics. Secondly, because of the great football program. And thirdly, because of the friendly student atmosphere. So again, subject is a why. You can almost always frame your subject as a why question, or as a where, who, what, where, when, why. You can frame it as some kind of question. In this case, it's a why question that's answered with three reasons. Because, all right? Because of the academics, because of the athletics, because of the other students. So Every main idea, every exegetical proposition, you want to think in terms of subject and complement. Subject and complement. You might have more than one complement, but they all have a subject and a complement. And once you can drill down into that, that's going to help you come up with a single statement to express the meaning of this text. So, for example, Colossians 1:13-23. I preached this text years ago, and I said, what is this text answering for me? What theological, doctrinal, biblical issue is this text answering? And what I came up with, if you read the passage, is it is answering what does Jesus do in the life of a believer, right? So there were three facets of Jesus' ministry toward us that emerged from that text. But as I looked at it, I was like, this is talking about all that Jesus has done for us in salvation. All right, what has Jesus done for us? Well, it came out, I said, okay, he's rescued us. He's saved us from sin and death. What else has he done? Well, he rules over us. He rules over the entire universe so we can trust that he's sovereign in our lives. And he reconciles us. He reconciles us to God where we were previously enemies of God. So the way that I framed my main exegetical proposition is actually he's our rescuer, our ruler, and our reconciler. Now, you may think, well, those are who statements, right? Who is Jesus? But really, they're just a reframing of what does Jesus do for us? Well, he rescues, he rules, he reconciles. So I framed my exegetical and eventually my homiletical proposition got there too. We'll talk about that later. Jesus is our rescuer, our ruler, and our reconciler, right? Again, so subject, what does Jesus do? Complements, he's our rescuer, our ruler, our reconciler. Let me give you one other. James 1:13-18. You read that passage, you go, okay, this passage is about trials. It's about suffering in the life of Jesus. James 1:13-18. If you need to pause the video and read the passage, go read the passage. All right? And then you go, okay, it's about suffering, it's about trials, but what about trials? Well, James is actually telling us how to respond in the midst of the temptation towards sin that often accompanies trials. All right, how do I respond to trials and avoid sin? So when you read it, here's what he says. It's a how question. How do I avoid the temptation that comes with trials? And he tells his readers, here's how. Reject the belief that God is trying to tempt you, right? Reject this belief that God is trying to tempt you to sin. That's verses 13-16. And instead, trust that God is a giver of good gifts. That's verses 17-18. So you might frame your exegetical proposition something like this. In the midst of temptations and trials, James tells his readers, 1, remember that God does not tempt people to sin, but instead, 2, God saves his people from sin and death. Subject, what should we remember in the face of trials? Complement, God doesn't tempt us. 2, God saves us. All right, very simple. Subject, complement. Now, I realize that I'm making it sound really simple, but as you get into each text, that's what you want to do. You go, what is this talking about? What question is this text answering? And how does it answer it? All right. Your exegetical idea at this point might be a little bit long. You're going to whittle it down before you preach it to something shorter and pithier, but it might be a little bit long. But creating that exegetical idea, I also want you to notice that has forced you to outline the passage. So now I have a pretty simple outline of James 1:13-18. What should we remember in the face of trials? 1, God doesn't tempt us. 2, instead, God saves us, right? That's the outline of the passage in a nutshell. Often that's going to happen when you look at subject and complement. So here's what I want you to do before the next video. Read Philippians chapter 2, verses 1-4, and I want you to try to write your own exegetical idea with a subject and a complement. What is Philippians 2, 1-4 talking about? What's the subject or the question that it's answering? And then what is it saying about that subject? What is the complement of Philippians 2, 1-4? So if you need to watch this again as you work on it, that's great. But spend some time in Philippians 2, 1-4, working on that exegetical idea, and then I'll see you again for the next session.